Hi, Senora Sir. This is Kari.
And Jaime.
And we are introducing to you the 1932 World Series against the Dodgers and the Yankees when Babe Ruth supposedly called his own shot and hit a home run into center field after pointing over the flagpole.
So, at this time, one article was written on the day the game was mentioned. And this was an article by Joe Williams, but he never once mentioned that Babe Ruth actually pointed. He just mentioned he had a home run. Now, other reporters began to read this article and began to make their own interpretations and ideas that he did point and it hit exactly where he wanted. So this was the start of different perspectives and looks for for articles.
So we don't actually have any videographic evidence. We do have a picture that makes it look like Babe Ruth was pointing towards center field, and we have his voice recording in an interview afterwards, but there is no actual video evidence of him pointing and then hitting the ball. It's just a picture. So here it is.
Down the center field, I scored it. I shot the next pitch ball right past the flagpole. Good lad, Mr.
At this point in time, as you can see, the picture was only of him pointing. It was very fuzzy. It wasn't good quality photograph because it was taken in 1932. It's very blurry. You can't see a whole lot of anything, and that was his voice that you just heard, and the quote that he just said was, "I'm going to hit the next ball right over the flagpole. Well, the good Lord must have been with me."
And obviously, at this event, a lot of doubt was being caused and speculation on whether or not this actually happened. So again, this was different perspectives of, just depending on who the person was, There are a lot of metaphysical beliefs and a lot of metaphysical statements based on your personal observations. And a lot of that dealt with whether you were a Yankees fan or if you were a Dodgers fan. Obviously, if you were a Yankees fan, you're more likely to say, yes, he did this amazing hit and he pointed exactly where he wanted to go. If you were a Dodgers fan, you could have said, no, he really did not do this. It wasn't something. So there was a lot of speculations on whether this actually happened. And like Kari said, that was a very blurry video, so it could have been anything. And Babe Ruth, his longtime friend, Ford Frick, actually once said, "Did you really point to the bleachers?" And the coy baseball player only replied, "It's in the papers, isn't it?"
So he never actually confirmed whether or not, yes or no, he did call the shot. He said, well, it's in the papers. He didn't say, yeah, heck yeah, I called that shot. He didn't say that. One of the writers for Chicago Times, Herbert Simmons, said, "This is the 25th anniversary of a historic baseball event that never happened. I know. I was there. I never saw it happen." So this is coming from a man who was actually there. He was a writer for the Chicago Times, but he saw the event happen, and I don't know where he was sitting in the stand, but he claims that Babe Ruth never called his shot, that he was just going like this and pointing two fingers, which we have photographic evidence of later, that he was only pointing two fingers, not one. So it didn't actually happen. So the event, depending on where you were sitting, of course, like the man, the writer of the Chicago Times, it changed your perception and the viewpoint of the fans. Again, we don't have a great quality of video. This event was actually never televised, so only the people that were there are the ones that can really have personal knowledge of this event. Every other single piece of knowledge was shared knowledge through stories, through amateur videos, such as this one that we just showed. It was passed down through generations, but all those generations didn't have that personal knowledge. The World Series was never televised. It was 1932. How could it have been televised? It couldn't have happened.
Exactly. So, moving on to the knowledge claims that Kari and I found for this event were 3 knowledge claims, and they were Babe Ruth pointed and called where he hit his home run shot. The second one was Babe Ruth hit the ball exactly where he pointed, and the last one was Babe Ruth played in the 1932 World Series where fans witnessed him pointing and hitting a home run.
So to check this, we can use the 3 checks, the pragmatic, the coherence, and correspondence check. Pragmatically, I can't say that this is, a really great way to check this event, because how could hitting a home run be necessarily useful? However, it did change the course of history. It did pragmatically change how baseball was viewed, how closely it was watched. The popularity of baseball did go off, so pragmatically it was useful to baseball as a whole, because it made the popularity of baseball dramatically spike after this hit shot, this called shot was made. Coherently, I know that my grandfather and my great-grandpa always talked about Babe Ruth's called shot, and they idolized him. They played baseball because they were inspired by Babe Ruth. And so coherently, I can say yes, but again, that's not personal knowledge, that's shared knowledge through generations to me. So coherently, I guess you could check it, especially if you were to talk to someone who was actually there. Correspondingly, it corresponds with a lot of things that people have said throughout the past. It corresponds with witnesses that were actually there. It corresponds throughout the stories that have been told. The story has never really changed, even though there was some controversy as to what was true and what was not.
And along with that, it's hard to pragmatically check something when the man himself, Babe Ruth, is actually dead. So it's not like we can go back. So in the end, he is the only person who has that personal knowledge, that it's the only person who knows for sure if he actually pointed where he wanted to hit the ball. And we obviously can't check that because he's not around anymore. So that goes back, but that's the personal knowledge that none of us have. And like Kari was stating, her and I as evaluators only have shared knowledge because we were never there. We weren't at the event, so we don't have, personal knowledge actually evidence. We just have, like Kari said, what her family has told her. I've had what people have told me, and then the articles and interviews that we began. We use our sense perceptions by looking at a video. A lot of fans use their sense perceptions depending on where they were in the stands to, if they were able to actually see if Babe Ruth pointed exactly where he hit the ball, and for emotional reasoning, it depended on if you were a Yankees fan or a Dodgers fan. If you were a Yankees fan, you're going to support that this is what happened. If you were a Dodgers fan, you might not emotionally support it because it's just not your team.
And so when you say all of these knowledge claims, naturally there's going to be knowledge questions. And I had actually heard a lot of these knowledge questions before we had even started this class. It was something that happened very naturally throughout the generations. How do we know that he called this shot? And so that kind of leads into, well, what is evidence of calling a shot? Does pointing constitute as evidence? We don't know this. We don't know what constitutes as evidence of calling a shot. Because, for instance, in soccer, if Jamie had said, "Here, I got it," then I know. But the fact that the volume in the stands was so incredibly loud, nobody could hear him do it. Nobody could say, this means he called a shot. This isn't an everyday gesture. If I did this, it looks like, I'm pointing to something or asking a question even, but it doesn't necessarily constitute calling a shot. More of the knowledge questions that we would come up with after that was, okay, well, how do we know that when he called the shot, how do we know that it actually got hit to the right place if it wasn't actually televised? How do we know that? Because we weren't there to see it. People who were there to see it, but then when you're sitting in a certain place, for instance, when I'm watching football on TV and they make the goal kick, I can't actually see the angle that it's going at, and a lot of times I think it didn't go through when it actually did. So that may have happened at the same time, depending on where you were sitting in the stands as well. So changing that perspective, and a lot of the knowledge questions I think were asked more through the generations, not necessarily the generation that was sitting at the game. So there's a picture.
So those knowledge questions eventually bring us into our final question, which leads us to, we have to ask ourselves when evaluating this photograph in this event, we have to ask ourselves, what justification makes videos or photographs evidence for historical events? For this, we're able to connect this to another historical event, and we dove into a World War II photograph that was famously known. The photograph is a photograph of a man and a woman, a sailor and a nurse, who were kissing at the very end of World War I in America, when World War I was declared over for America. World War II was over for America. And this photograph shows the happiness and the joy that World War II is over. But a lot of people, depending on their sense perception and their view, believed it was viewed and it wasn't a real event. So this brings us to, we have to use everything we did here in Babe Ruth in order to determine whether that was a true event or if it was fake. You know, we have to look at the different angles, we have to look at the different viewpoints and how people thought back then in order to determine whether it was true.
And unfortunately, I cannot pull up the pictures that were on the computer just now. I can't get the computer to turn back on to show you the two different pictures of the same event, which I thought was kind of interesting because when you look at Babe Ruth's pictures, we've only managed to find one picture of him pointing. And I did find another one, which was also on the computer, and it was a clearer picture, so to me it kind of looks photoshopped. It doesn't look like the real thing. The picture that I found of the kiss, which was the sailor kissing the nurse, I found two different angles of it. One was taken from more of a side angle, and the other was taken from a straight, dead-on angle. And this picture, you know, it just, how do we know that that's evidence? It goes back to our knowledge question of how do we know? What constitutes this as evidence that this really happened? How do we know that this wasn't a staged event, as the controversy for that picture often is? And we are running out of time. Thank you for listening so much.
So in conclusion, we figure both events are true based on reasoning, evaluation of perceptions, emotion, and just from interviews and the evidence that we have ourselves. So thank you for our presentation. I hope you enjoyed.